do a little bit of group work in talking about some of these things tonight. If you did look at the email, there are a ton of verses, and that ton of verses was cut down from a humongous list of verses. So there's actually a whole lot that's talked about in the Old Testament about elders. The word elders appears many times in the Old Testament. Also, even when we get to the New Testament, it seems like we only think elders are mentioned when it comes to Timothy and Titus, but elders are mentioned throughout the New Testament as well. And so tonight I want us to go through a little bit of a history of elders, especially in the Old Testament, as it runs into the New Testament. Then next month we'll talk a little bit more about elders and get into some of the qualifications. But tonight we're really going to emphasize the idea of the shepherding model. One of the things that when JD was coming up with a list of topics for the year and leadership came up, it was thought that it'd be a really good time for us to talk about, once again, qualifications of elders. And it's especially good because we're not actually looking to appoint any elders right now. It's always a good time to be doing that, and not only when we're looking to appoint some. And so tonight we're going to be looking at that shepherding model a little more closely. All right, before we get started, I've asked Ryan to lead us in prayer.
Let's bow. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be thy name. We bow before your throne at this time, thanking you so much for all the many blessings you've given us, this beautiful day, this time that we have to come together to study your scriptures, to learn more about you and your will for us. We thank you for our brethren and the love that we have for each other in our congregation that we have here. Please be with us and guide us as we strive to live as Christ lived, as we learn more about elders and leaders. Help us to be strong leaders. Help us to guide those who need guidance, and help us to lean on you and your word. We thank you for this beautiful day and every breath you allow us to breathe. We plead you with Brother Eddie as he brings us a message from your word. Help us to focus on your scriptures and to absorb them and apply them to our lives, to be shining lights into this world. Please forgive us of our sins. And we thank you for Jesus, our Lord and Savior. And it is in Christ's name that we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right, so for the first part of this study, what we're going to be looking at is just some of the history. And there's a few things that I want us to look at. First, we're going to talk about the origin, where elders began to be talked about in the scriptures, and sort of a change that takes place when it comes to elders, what their responsibilities were, who they were, even some qualifications that they had. These men were expected to do certain things. We'll notice some of that. We'll also talk about the failures of the elders in the Old Testament, and then talk a little bit about their power that they had during the time of Christ and draw some applications from that. So first, somebody turn to Job 12, verse 12. Job 12, verse 12. If you need one of the sheets, if you'll raise your hand, Oregon can get you one. Job 12, 12.
Wisdom is with the ages, and understanding is with the age.
All right, that's a general statement, right? It's not always the case that you have wisdom and understanding just because a person has grown older. But it should be the case as a person grows older, they also grow more mature. And with that maturity should come some wisdom and understanding. Even the people who I've known in years past that may be older, that they may not have a whole lot of book smart, but they've got a whole lot of life smart. They know how to do things that I've never even thought about doing them that way. They've went through experiences that I have not. And so it should go hand in hand that with maturity also comes wisdom and understanding. What did the word elder mean? It's actually something I ran into this week where somebody said something about elders I had never heard somebody say before. So I do want us to talk for just a minute. What does the word elder mean?
Old man.
Yeah, basically, yeah. Usually both. You know, I heard someone say that they listened to a sermon not too long ago where it was preached that elders are not necessarily older men. I thought that's what the word elder actually meant. So I actually looked up the definition again to make sure I wasn't forgetting something, you know, in my old age, I guess. But Yeah, the word in the Hebrew can refer to that which is old or identifies a person as being old. It literally means old. Actually, the definition of it means old, aged, or bearded as well.
I think context matters, and so I'm not trying to defend someone who would say doesn't necessarily mean old, because old is relative.
Yeah.
If men are living to their mid-40s, and there have been generations, centuries of times where majority of people did not see their 50s,
Right.
then when you are 37 and 42, you're the old man in the group.
Right.
And that may not be the way we think of it, but
I'm hoping that that was lost in translation somewhere because that was just, yeah, because that was, it was kind of odd to hear that. The first time that we have mention of elders in the Old Testament, as far as I understand, is in Genesis 50 and verse 7. Did you have something, Mitch? I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, were they Mormon?
Yeah, no, it was actually supposed to be a church, a Lord's church. Yeah. So again, it threw me off when I heard that. I was thinking they had to have heard something wrong. But Genesis 50 and verse 7, does anybody have the NIV or have it available?
You said Genesis what?
50 and verse 7. I'd like for somebody to read it out of the NIV. Go to Bob.
That's not my translation.
Oh, okay.
I think it has what you're looking for. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went all the servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his household, and all the elders of the land of Egypt.
Yeah, most of them use the word elders, but this is the reason I wanted the NIV. Go ahead, Chris.
I'm sorry.
So Joseph went up to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials accompanied him, the dignitaries of his court, and all the dignitaries of Egypt.
Yeah, so here you have like elders, but dignitaries. That's who they're associated with. And so this is the first time where it's actually mentioned in scriptures. And so among different families, clans, villages, cities, towns, nations, you would have various groups of elders that would have various responsibilities, not just among God's people. And so it wasn't something that was especially peculiar only to God's people. But the first time, if you go to Exodus 3 and verse 16, the first time they're actually talked about in an official sense is here in Exodus chapter 3. If somebody read verse 16.
Go and gather the elders of Israel together and say to them, the Lord God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, appeared to me, saying, I have surely visited you and seen what is done to you in Egypt.
Okay, so this is when he sent to tell the Israelites, the Hebrew children, about the deliverance that's going to be coming, that God had sent him to them for this very purpose. And the ones that he gathered were the elders. One of the things that the elders had the responsibility to do that we're going to see is they would take the word from, let's say, Moses or some other leader, and they would take that to the people. It may be that the people had a message that they want brought before the king. And so they would get the elders of the land to take that message to the king to deliver it. And so it was one of the jobs that they had. But some of the other things that you start seeing is that, like in chapter 4 of Exodus, verses 29 and 30, it says, Moses and Aaron went and gathered together all the elders of the children of Israel. Aaron spoke the whole word which the Lord had spoken to Moses, and he did the signs inside of the people. And then later on in chapter 12 and also chapter 19, you see that these elders then had the responsibility of teaching it to the people. Someone read Exodus 19, verses 7 and 8.
So Moses came and called for the elders of the people and laid before them all these words which the Lord commanded him. Then all the people answered them together and said, all that the Lord has spoken we will do. So Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord.
Okay, so, obviously during this time period there wasn't a way of mass communication like we have today. And so this is the way that it was accomplished, is that the elders were to take this word to others. But what you also see that starts to grow out from this is that there are more and more tribes, there's more and more people, there's scattered over larger areas of land because of how big they've gotten. And so there's a special group that's formed, a smaller group that's more select. Exodus 24. And somebody read verse 1 and then verses 9 through 11.
Then he said to Moses, come up to the Lord, you and Aaron, Nahab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship from afar. And then 9 through 11.
Yes, sir.
It says, Then Moses and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu and the 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. They were under his feet as it were a pavement of sapphire stone, like the very heaven for clearness. 11 says, And he did not lay his hand on the chief man of the people of Israel. They beheld God and ate and drank.
All right, so what's happening here in Exodus 25 is God is starting to impart all the different laws that we're going to read about when we get to like Leviticus. And God has this special meal that's with, and we always remember Moses and Aaron. We may even remember that Nadab and Abihu is there, which is interesting because Nadab and Abihu are there with God, being shown and being told these things with this special meal that God has provided. And then the first time worship is offered in Leviticus, what happens? Strange fire, and they're killed for it. And they were just here. But one thing we may forget, though, is that it was also 70 of the elders that were also brought as well. Remember that number 70, because that's going to play a role in just a moment. All right, so then in Numbers 11. Somebody read 16 and 17.
The Lord therefore said to Moses, Gather for me 70 men from the elders of Israel, whom you know to be the elders of the people and their officers. Bring them to the tent of meeting and have them take their stand with you.
All right, so, I'm sorry, read 17 too. I'm sorry.
Then I will come down and speak with you there, and I will take away some of the Spirit who is upon you, and put him upon them. And they shall bear the burden of the people with you, so that you will not bear it by yourself.
All right, when we get to Deuteronomy chapter 1, it's going to be a recounting of this scene that we have right here. And what is happening here is when Moses is calling or God is calling for these 70 men to become elders from among who? Who's he calling the 70 elders from? From among who? Not just the people.
70 men from the elders of Israel.
Yeah, from the elders of Israel. And so it shows us that the 70 elders that are mentioned, when it comes to Israel, that this was a very select group, and that there were already elders amongst all the people. Again, when you go through it, you see elders, and we're going to see elders over like tens of people, hundreds of people, thousands of people. You've got them over families, clans, cities, towns, villages, the nation. But these 70 were very select. Verses 24 and 25 of that same chapter. Somebody read that.
So Moses went out and told the people the words of the Lord, and he gathered 70 men of the elders of the people and placed them around the tent. And the Lord came down in the cloud and spoke to him, and took some of the Spirit that was on him, and put it on the 70 elders. And as soon as the Spirit rested on them, they prophesied. But they did not continue doing it.
All right. Mine says, although they never did it again. So it seemed to be something that God was using to show a sign that these elders had his approval, and to show them that they were able to speak on behalf of God because God had put some of the Spirit of Moses upon them. The reason that it was there was because Moses was not capable of doing all the work and carrying all the burden by himself. Now, if we go back in history, in the scriptures, when did that happen? When somebody told Moses, the work is too much for you. It's not right for you to be taking it all upon your shoulders. You need to get help. Right, his father-in-law, tells him that we need to appoint these judges. It's in the process of those judges that elders were also appointed during that time also to oversee some of this. That's what we see when we get to Deuteronomy chapter 1. Okay, so Deuteronomy chapter 1. And somebody read verses 9 through 18 of Deuteronomy 1.
I spoke to you at that time, saying, I am not able to bear the burden of you alone. The Lord your God multiplied you, and behold, you are this day like the stars of heaven in number. May the Lord, the God of your fathers, increase you 1,000-fold more than you are, and bless you, just as he has promised you. How can I alone bear the load and burden of you and your strife? Choose wise and discerning and experienced men from your tribes, and I will appoint them as your heads. You answered me and said, the thing which you have said to do is good. So I took the heads of your tribes, wise and experienced men, and appointed them heads over you, leaders of thousands and hundreds, of 50s and 10s of 10 and officers for your tribes. Then I charged your judges at the time, saying, hear the cases between your fellow countrymen, and judge righteously between man and his fellow countryman, or the alien who is with him. You shall not show partiality in judgment. You shall fear the small and the great alike. You shall not fear man, for the judgment is God's. The case that is too hard for you, you shall bring it to me, and I will hear it. I commanded you at that time all the things that you should do.
All right, so what are some of the characteristics and qualifications that these men needed to have that we see listed here?
Wise, discerning, informed.
Okay, wise, discerning, informed. Are those very specific terms or are they general terms?
General.
Yeah, they're pretty general in nature, aren't they? Right.
Wise in what is the first question.
Right. Yeah. And that's the thing, is that when you're thinking about the qualifications of elders, and this is going to play a part when we get into the New Testament and qualifications, many of them are general in nature, and that they talk about things like blameless. What exactly does blameless mean? Is it very specific, or is it something that's very general in nature? Some of them are very specific. Husband of one wife is pretty specific. You know, believing children is pretty specific about some things. And so when you think about the qualifications, we're going to see a little bit of both. But it does have some other qualifications in here. What were some of the other ones? Say it again, sorry.
Impartiality.
Impartiality, yeah. Why would they need to be impartial?
True side. Justice.
Yeah, it's very hard, you know, and when you get a personal matter, you know, it's not easy to recuse yourself from that because it is very personal in nature to you. And being an elder, there are things that you're passionate about, that you're very personally involved in just because these are your brethren, these are your brothers and sisters, right?
And you also hear the great and the small.
Yeah.
Like, I think one thing I heard about leaders, ones that really lead, is they're not above doing the small tasks.
Right. Yep. The small task and doing things for the small people as well. What else you see here? Anything else?
Not to be afraid of any person.
Not be afraid of any person. Why would that be a quality that's needed?
You can be intimidated in your role as a leader, that makes you compromise.
But if you're the-
You can lead effectively. If
Yeah.
you're scared of someone else and more afraid of someone else than you are of God.
Yeah. But if you're the top dog, why don't you be afraid of anybody? I mean, like in the church today, the elder's top dog, right?
I think the scared terminology could be reframed to understand that some men are people pleasers.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to want to do what the majority says.
Right.
They're going to want to do maybe the most eloquent, brash, forceful, not an elder,
Right.
or maybe even one of the elders
Mhm.
that's not part of the 70. And you have this tendency to want to give sway to this, that, and the other.
Right.
That's not objectivity. That's not leadership. That's namby-pamby worthlessness.
Yeah, it is. You think about with Joshua and Caleb, you know, there are two of the 12 that go out. The other 10 say, no, we can't take the land. And when Joshua and Caleb's like, well, yes, we can. We need to go ahead and take the land. What do the people want to do to them? Let's stone them. Right? If you're going to be in a position of leadership, especially among God's people in this time period, you might get stoned pretty quick. John?
Yeah, I was going to say to Brad's point, I would not call those people leaders. They're more politicians or high school popularity contests.
Right.
Which is what it comes down to, you know, and I think that's why God says you can't be afraid, right? Because what's going to happen? You're going to either have the masses come against you for some decision that you make, or there's going to be someone that wants your position.
Yeah. It's difficult just to do the right thing for the right reasons because it is right no matter what the consequences are. That is not always easy. As parents, it's not even easy. When you think about, you know, leadership of a congregation of God's people, you're going to have a lot of people with a lot of different ideas and viewpoints. It's not always easy to get everybody on the same page, especially when people might be against you and you wanted to do the thing that's right regardless. One more and then we'll.
Well, and you just have to, I think it's also when you answer something or you give a judgment, somebody may not think it's fair.
Yeah.
They may not like that, right? So you have to think about both parties. There has to be this, and they may not understand that you have to stand firm in that.
Yes.
That's kind of the hard part. It's like,
It is.
and just same thing as parents. It's like kids may not understand, but yeah, it's fair to everybody.
Right.
or whatever the situation is.
It is, and it's hard. I mean, it does affect you, if you're not careful. But you see things like the qualifications, like in verse 13, has some kind of qualifications. It's verified again that there's more than just the 70 that's appointed here. There's some on the national level. We see in verses 16 and 17 of the text that they also worked as judges. Verse 15 also points out that they were leaders. Again, I wanted you to pay attention to how many times this 70 is used. When you think about 70 in the New Testament, who is 70 in the New Testament? And this, well, you have the 72 that he sends out, yeah, or sends out the 70, but among the leadership of Israel, Sanhedrin. This is where Sanhedrin comes from, is this idea of having 70 judges, and that's where they got it from. So they choose them from some of the elders of the land, as it were, and they appoint them as being these leaders. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what these men were expected to do. Deuteronomy 19, 11, and 12, we're going to go through Deuteronomy a few times. Deuteronomy 19, verses 11 and 12. And I'm just going to read these as we go through. Just follow along and notice some of the things that they were supposed to be doing. Deuteronomy 19, verse 11 and 12. But if anyone hates his neighbor, lies in wait for him, rises against him, and strikes him mortally so that he dies, and he flees to one of these cities of refuge that have been set up, then the elders of this city shall send and bring him from there and deliver him over to the hand of the avenger of blood, that he may die. Want to be an elder? Right. All right. Then you go a little bit further, chapter 22. We won't read all these verses, but verses 13 through 21 are laws of sexual immorality. If a man has a wife and goes into her, detests her, he believes that she's not a virgin and so forth, that this is something that the elders are supposed to be involved in and taken care of. There's a passage also, is it chapter 25? Yes. Look over at chapter 25 of Deuteronomy, verses 8 and 9. This is sort of along the same lines, but notice this. This is a man who does not want to carry on the seed with his brother's wife when that brother dies. Verses 8 and 9. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him. But if he stands firm and says, I do not want to take her, then his brother's wife shall come to him in the presence of the elders, remove his sandal from his feet, spit in his face, and answer and say, so shall it be done to the man who will not build up his brother's house. That might be a little entertaining to watch, I don't know, but still. But when you think about some of the things that elders were involved in, there's been some very odd situations been involved in as a preacher and as an elder. None like this, but but they get pretty close. And so the elders had a tremendous amount of responsibility that was given to them in some very touchy and unusual situations. They were also expected to sit in the gates. If you go through the Old Testament and just find the word elder every time it's used and just read through those, you'll find a lot of the different tasks that are there. Proverbs 31 is a chapter about what? About the woman, the virtuous woman. But it says that he is known in the gates when he sits among the elders, which means he was probably one of the elders. I think some of the versions even point to that he is among the elders because he's one of the elders that's there. There's passages that seem to speak about Job possibly being one of the elders of the land as well. Why would they be sitting in the gate or at the gate? Yeah, there's things you have to judge, like this man fleeing the avenger of blood would be one.
That's where Absalom gets caught up, right?
Yes.
Trying to do the elder's job.
Yep, that's it. Yep. You see that as well with Absalom. There's also things that, if the king were to send something to the land, the elders would be the ones at the gates that would receive it, and then they had the job of distributing that to the people as well. And so it was many acts of service that they did while they're at the gate and even judging things. That would be a good place for them to be because the people knew where to go to talk to the elders when they were needed. One of their jobs was also to teach the law. Chapter 27 and verse 1 is just one example of it. Moses with the elders of Israel commanded the people, saying, keep all the commandments which I command you today. And when you go through chapter 31, 9 through 11, and also verses 28 and 29, go to that. Deuteronomy 31, verses 28 and 29. Here it says, gather to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their hearing and call heaven and earth to witness against them, For I know that after my death you will become utterly corrupt and turn aside from the way in which I've commanded you, and evil will befall you in the latter days, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord, to provoke him to anger through the work of your hands. Who does that sound like? After my departure. Well, Jesus says some things about that as well, but who else said something about it? To some elders. I think it's written on your paper. Right, Paul. Yeah, Paul warned the Ephesian elders, said, after my departure, grievous wolves will arise, even from among you, not sparing the flock. It sounds very much like these very words that's here in Deuteronomy as well. So one of the things that they had a responsibility to do was to keep the people faithful. Remember in Joshua, the elders are assembled and they're told these things by Joshua. And then in Joshua 24:31, it says that after Joshua died, the people remained faithful because who else was still leading them after his departure? The elders. The people remained faithful with Joshua, and the elders that outlived Joshua, the people remained faithful during that time as well. But instead, and we're not going to read all these, but these just a few of the examples. Instead of doing that, you start getting into a lot of passages, especially when you get into the prophets and further, about the different ways in which the elders were doing things they should not have done. When you go through Isaiah and Ezekiel, there's a lot of things said about secret sins, that the elders in their homes were committing these sins secretly. Some of them were things about idolatry, that they were bringing these idols into their home and they were worshiping them in their home, but it didn't seem like they were doing that openly in front of the people. Some of them it talks about that they were setting up these idols within their own hearts in their homes, and it was leading them astray as a result of that. You also see that they give bad advice. Absalom was one of the examples that you could go to. 1 Samuel chapter 4, what is the issue in 1 Samuel chapter 4 and also 1 Samuel chapter 8? Two different ones. Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 through 11, what happens?
Ark of the Lord is captured.
Yeah, somebody captures the ark of God, right? They went out to battle. They did not consult God like they were supposed to, so they go out to battle. They get defeated in battle, and they're coming back saying, well, what is the deal? Why did we get defeated? The elders' advice in verse 3 is what? You forgot your good luck charm, is basically what they say. You know, you need the ark. You didn't take the ark with you. That's why you got defeated. You didn't have your procedures in order. You didn't have your checklists. They gave them bad advice. That was not the issue. The issue was they had not consulted God at all and thought that they could dictate to God what the terms were going to be. Chapter 8. In some ways, it's sort of along the same lines, of at least attitude. Chapter 8, what does Israel want? And the elders of Israel gathered, verses 4 and 5, to Samuel and said, look, you are old and your sons do not walk in your ways. Now make us a king to judge us like all the other nations. The elders came up with that and presented it to him. And so they were not always doing the things that they should. When you get to 1 Kings chapter 21.
Don't you think that there, the elders didn't want to have, they didn't want to do this.
Yeah, have somebody else tell us what to do.
Be a king, I'm off the hook.
Right.
Unless the king picks me to do something.
Right.
My role as an elder is government.
Yeah.
And I think that is the most criminal offense that you can have.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
Appointed to be recognized, to have the duty, and then shirk it by coming up with a scheme of some outlandish thing that's just adoption of what the people of the world do.
Yep, absolutely.
Have you ever had that happen with elders today? It's a real question.
I've never seen it. Honestly, I haven't. This is a sad commentary. This is only the second congregation I've ever been a part of that had elders. And I've been a Christian since '98. That's how sad it is in a lot of places. 1 Kings 21, 11 and 12. That is not correct. Nope, that is not correct. Oh, I'm in the wrong book. That's why it's not correct. Okay. 1 Kings 21, 11 and 12. This is where Naboth is murdered, and what happens is he's wanting the vineyard that Naboth has, Ahab does, and he's pouting about it. So Jezebel comes up with a scheme to send this proclamation out and declare this fast and everything, and set Naboth up and bring false witnesses against him. Verse 11 and 12, so the men of the city, the elders, and the nobles, who were inhabitants of the city, did as Jezebel had sent to them, as is written in the letters which shall be sent. They proclaimed a fast, seated Naboth with high honor among the people. The elders had done it. Why should elders not be people who are afraid of things? Because of stuff like this. You'll have someone with prestige, with honor, with power, who's going to say, this is what I want done, and they're going to make you try to do it. And that happens in congregations also. There are people who believe that they're in charge of the congregation against God's wishes. And so these are some of the things that you see that were there. During the time of Christ, you also see how powerful they were, that when Jesus is brought in Matthew 26 and Mark chapter 14 and 15, also with the apostles in Acts 5 and also Acts 23 and verse 14, you see that some of the ones who are conspiring against Christ and bringing Christ before Pilate and the high priest and delivering him over, who do the same things to the apostles, among those are the elders also of the people. And so it is easy for elders to become corrupted if they're not careful. And then Jesus, even in Matthew 16, said that he was going to be delivered up by the scribes, the Pharisees, and the elders. We always think about scribes and Pharisees, but not the elders. But we see how much power they had. Now, there's one notable exception in Luke 7, that you have this Gentile, this centurion, who has this servant that's sick, that he cares deeply about, and he wants him healed. And so he wants to send to Jesus for Jesus to do this miracle for him, to heal this servant. And he gets the elders to go. And the elders go to Jesus. And the elders say, this man's worthy because he built for us a synagogue. Please do this thing for him. So it wasn't all the elders, just as it wasn't all the Pharisees and chief of the land, but primarily they made up the huge group of it. Okay, so any questions or comments on any of that? We'll spend a few minutes now and do a little bit of group work. We're going to look at these passages, and I believe they're all on that sheet that you have. And I want you to go through there and think about the idea of shepherding model. And what I mean by that is I want you to look at that and make application of the role of a shepherd that is inherent in God and how God is with us and how that can be transferred onto elders today, how it should be today. So let's take, I guess we could count and divide up. This will be 1, 2, 3, and 4. All the ones will go here, all the twos will go here, all the threes will go here, all the fours will go there. And we'll just count.
3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 4. 4. 1, 2, 4. 6, 4. 2. All right, that's perfect. Okay, so again, all the ones over there, twos here, threes here, fours over there, and work on those questions, and we'll get back together at about 10 minutes or so.
About 12 minutes. I would entertain
I think that I just courage. And obviously, people we're coming off what kind of blessings. Yeah, no fear, facing Goliath, which will have absolute confidence in this. And then also, like you talked about, Preston, the whole and then finance that I think sounds
Eddie, are we all supposed to work on all of them at the same time, or we work on one and then you're gonna get back to us? No, we're on.
But you live on the same, some of everybody's on the same.
What else? And he's the Lord. But he is fierce. That's I can see looking at it. So we have described
the next one's one person.
Juxtaposed fiercely protected. People normally would fight, well, if you're fiercely protected, well, you'll force those shadows.
I'm actually working.
And the end of it is a actually messianic Christ, even though he's using the same David,
David, my beloved. Yeah, sorry. We're summarizing. What I heard. It'll take a while. Good deal.
Basically, we have to do really where we reserve our
Now it's the high priest.
yeah, like, and all those. Sometimes, I think that's kind of what this is talking about. Holding up their own position, that they'll, have this person, what should have been said. Well, let's just give them up. We read it out.
It's a good one.
Yeah.
Someone have Psalm 78?
What's the specific operation?
Even though everybody needs this house.
Points out that is what the shepherd is the shepherd. That piece of the flock will follow. You can't leave.
Looking at current examples.
So that to follow such a guided
Difference from
stay together. That's what a flock is. They stay together. Gives you something as to the nature of the it applies clearly to each other. You will have, it is literally a congregation will have there will be faction. And that's not guiding the flock. Those elders need to be.
I will set over them one shepherd, I will say this to them, he will give them.
If they're unified, we're doing this right, and they're being worthy of being followed.
All right, I got about 1 minute, so we're going to be wrapping up, and then we'll start going through some of these. right, let's start going through some of these passages now. You don't have to move back to your seats. We can be like this. It's kind of odd, but that's all right. All right. So 1 Samuel 17 is, what's that an account of? David and Goliath, right? What were some of the things you saw about this shepherding model with David?
We came up with he was taking charge. He got up early and he was ready to save others first. Very strong, standing up and not backing down.
Okay, yeah. That strong, not backing down type disposition. Anything else?
Matt put up, pulled out like a really awesome point. Where, you know, like there were all these promises for what would happen to the man that could defeat Goliath. And yet Matt pointed out like every time David talks about why he's doing what he's doing, it's for the Lord. And that parallel to the eldership where, you know, it is an honor and it is an office that should be esteemed, but at the same time, the moment you make it about yourself is the moment you've lost its purpose.
Yeah.
It's for the Lord. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, that was good. And I don't want to throw any cold water on it, but I do like it when they talk about all the benefits that could come to them. And it's like, okay. Then when they say something about not paying taxes, he's like, can you say that again? And they actually like run through it again. So I don't get a tax break as an elder, but that would be pretty cool. Anything else? Did you see any difference between Goliath and, oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say he's fiercely protected.
Yes, very fiercely protected. Because, you know, with the sheep, it was the sheep, but with the people, they were God's people. You know, how dare you come against God's people this way? How dare you come against God this way? Did he see any difference between the lion and the bear than Goliath? Right, and that's the thing is that, and that's one of the things I think is important when you think about a shepherding model, is that when God sees the enemy, it doesn't matter if it's a person or the nation or the entire world. God is equally powerful and is not intimidated by any of it. As elders, you're supposed to have sort of that same disposition, is that so long as you're doing the thing that is right, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's one that stands against you or 249 that stand against you. It doesn't matter. You just do what is right, period. And that's not easy to do, but I believe that's the attitude that you're supposed to have. Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were raising your hand. Yeah, sorry. Anything else on David? All right, very cool. David was young, though, right? So where do you think this came from within David? Where did this attitude, this disposition? Because remember when Samuel comes and he's like bringing the people about who's going to be the next king? Who did he not bring? He didn't bring David.
He didn't bring the elder of the family.
Right, the ones that go, right, yeah, you're right. He didn't bring the little shepherd boy. He leaves him out there with the sheep. So evidently his father didn't think that David had the potential. So where do you think he got it from?
You just said he'd been shepherding.
Right. He'd been out there with the sheep. Right. And so, you know, when we went through like the lesson last week, where do elders come from? Congregations make a mistake, I believe, often in waiting till, okay, Charlie and Craig and Eddie are getting where we're only just a few heartbeats away from not having an eldership. We need to start looking for elders. Let's see who's qualified. That's a huge mistake, I think. And I think that's what a lot of congregations do. We need to be talking more to the young guys. That while you're out here fighting these battles, you're out here learning how to raise kids and things, this is when you're starting to develop not just the qualifications, but the actual desire for the work is at this age.
The capacity that David developed apparently was formulated on the basis not of his work as a shepherd boy only, but of his relationship with God.
Yeah.
There was something about his knowledge of who God is, what God is capable of. He was well studied for a very young man, very young boy. And that principle is what's lost on too many.
Yeah.
You're not going to develop that if you start at 65.
Yeah, well, he's out there in the field. I mean, he's out there writing songs and things, right?
He brought into the battle incredible confidence. that I think probably the others, including Saul, probably thought was like, okay, you're a little too confident.
Right.
Right? But he had faith in God that, hey, I've already done this a couple times.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where he learned it from, you know, and that's the thing. I mean, if you lose a few sheep, is that really such a big deal? Well, to me, it's not. To the shepherd, it means a whole lot. And, you know, you develop that type of devotion to it. We'll get one more.
Yes, he who desires the position of an elder desires a good thing. It's something that is to be desired
Right.
and aspired for. It's something that doesn't just happen overnight. It's something that is worked for. You look at David and his journey throughout his entire life. What was always the primary factor in the children of Israel not going astray was having a good leader.
Absolutely.
And that developed later on in his life. He had his missteps, but by and large, he led the people of Israel on good paths.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more
Right.
point.
Okay.
David would not have been deemed successful as a shepherd if he had reported to Dad, I only lost 2 sheep today.
Right.
And then the lion came up, and I'm not facing that lion.
Right.
And then the next time, it's, well, I lost 1, it was a bear. This time. That would not be good accountability.
Right.
And that principle applies within the eldership.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some elderships who are not all that concerned
Right.
with lost sheep
Yeah.
from that flock.
I actually talked to an elder several years ago that was talking about some of his members that had lost, and was wondering if I knew where any of them had showed up or anything. And he made the statement, they were marginal members anyway. Yeah.
Anyways,
That's what I did. That kind of hurt. Yeah. Marginal members anyway. Yeah. Very easy to do. Okay, Isaiah 40 and verse 11. One verse. He will feed his flock like a shepherd. He will gather the lambs with his arms and carry them in his bosom and gently lead those who are with young. What did y'all get from this one? Right?
So we were discussing as very caring and affectionate, as well as the shepherd knowing them well enough to know when something's wrong.
Yeah. Intuitive about things. Yeah. You can kind of know you kind of get the mood of the flock, right? Anything else? Dave, go ahead, Mike.
I think also with that, it's the idea also that the sheep are comfortable with them.
Yes.
That they can come to the shepherd and know that that's the person you go to.
Right. You think about the difference between like David in this first example, that David is out there and he's able to fight the lion and fight the bear and fight Goliath. And that makes him a good shepherd because he's like this warrior, right? Very passionate, very strong, very courageous, very determined. But then this passage is a whole lot more about the gentleness, the caring, the bearing, being able to handle those even that have young as well. You see that there's a tenderness behind the warrior that's supposed to be there too.
Yeah, I was going to say, I definitely see a focus on the young in this verse. It does say he will gather the lamb with his arm, but also in the very end, he can gently lead those who are with young. So he's specifically reaching out to the young, but also reaching out to those who have the young.
Right.
So that they can lead by example.
Yeah. And when you get older, that might be something that seems a little more distant. You know, you're far away from your own childhood, so you may not identify with those younger very much. And that's something you need as well. All right, let's go to Ezekiel 34. Ezekiel 34 is a chapter that, along with Timothy and Titus, should probably be read by elderships more often. Along with several other passages, isn't the only one. But Ezekiel 34 is a scary chapter because it deals very harshly with what God expected from his elders of his people, and he was not receiving, and how they were irresponsible as being shepherds. What are some of the things you noticed from that?
Attributes of good and bad elders.
Yeah, especially bad. It does. It starts off really, really bad, right? But then it ends with God being that true shepherd, right? What else? Any particular verses that stood out to you?
I really like verse 6, how he's, God is calling out the shepherds for the way that they've been treating what they thought of as their flock.
Right.
And God says, my flock.
Right.
My flock has been scattered across the hills. And that recognition that as an elder, yeah, it's kind of your flock, but this is God's flock.
It's God's flock, yeah.
That is a much scarier
Yep.
thing than it just being your flock.
Yeah. I mean, again, when Paul was warning the Ephesian elders, that's one of the things he told them, right? Shepherd the flock of God, which is among you. That God purchased this with his blood, not yours. All right. Well,
Yeah, I think it's a warning on the loving the position, but you eat the fat, you do this, but you have forgotten the sheep.
right.
We're talking about how just basically set them out in the pasture and forget that they were ever there.
Yeah.
And
Put a fence up. I mean,
it's kind of, when you go down to verse 7, kind of goes towards when Jesus was talking to the Pharisees, the part of the class that I just got done with on Wednesdays. And he who has ears to hear, let him hear.
Right.
When the Lord tells you to hear the word of the Lord, and he's speaking directly to you, it's time to listen because you may have done something wrong.
yes. Yeah, he's calling you out. Yes, absolutely. Anything else? That-
Well, it talks about being self-serving. I think we all think this situation or heard a story where the elders, it's a popularity contest for them, so it's the duel of the elders.
Yeah.
Or more members means private payment. More members, more money. Or something happens in their life, personally, where an eldership tears itself apart because one of their daughters goes and enters into a sin, becomes divorced from marriage, and suddenly, well, I thought about it wrong the entire time. There's a congregation in that.
Yeah.
Self-serving comes in many ways, shapes, and
Yes.
forms, and God hopefully can lead someone back astray if they will heed or back to Him if they will listen, but that can be very destructive.
Yeah. I've known of many preachers and some elders who have changed their point of view when there's a very personal thing that's going on in their family. All right, Mike?
That last phrase in verse 6, there was no one to search or seek for them.
Yeah. Read verse 12 also, because I was going to bring up that point as well.
And the shepherd cares for his herd of the day when he's among the scattered sheep, so I will care for my sheep. I will deliver them from all the places to which they were scattered on the cloudy and gloomy day.
Yeah.
So I've come across at least one elder, and I've seen this a couple of times when, again, because I've traveled to different states, so I've mentioned some, just passing, I've known this person, and they maybe no longer go to church. And the care that somebody has from years ago, they're still interested. It's like, how are they doing?
Right.
Did they make it back?
Right.
It's like how, and so that's a true elder, that one that cares. Even if they left their congregation and they don't know where they went.
Yes.
And it's like the care they have for them years later, I can see them.
Yeah. When Jesus was on the scene, they're weary and scattered like sheep not having a shepherd. It echoes back to this, that was the thing that he was most wanting. And instead, it was frustration and lack of care, and there was no spiritual development among the people because of this attitude that they had. Verse 31 of Ezekiel 34, you are my flock, the flock of my pasture. Like Chris was talking about earlier, that this is God's flock, it's God's people. Trey, did you have something on that?
Yes. Yeah.
And then we'll move on.
Verse 4 seems to indicate that we need to give particular interest to the weak and the injured. They weren't doing that. They were just doing whatever they needed to do to stay fat themselves.
Yeah, it's depressing. Yeah.
So it seems like there must be special attention given to some.
Right. Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Ezekiel 34 is definitely a wake-up call to any eldership, I believe. Psalm 78, 52 and 53.
One more thing, verse 16 of that, it talks about, I will seek for them, bring back the straight, bind up the weak, strengthen the weak. That is so indicative of what the role of an elder is.
are looking at the flock, you are among the flock, you know the flock. And so when there is one of the flock that's injured, they've been marred and harmed, hurt by someone else, whether it's in or out of the church, when you see someone that is struggling and it's painfully awful for them, whatever the reason, sin or otherwise, the elder's job is to be immersed in that with them, not to say, we'll pray for you.
Right.
And that's where the eldership role is so often lost.
Yeah.
I love the role of a shepherd. Don't make me get my hands dirty.
Right. That's the thing is that elder is definitely a biblical term that's supposed to be used along with several others. But like we're looking at tonight is more that shepherding model. Is what does it mean to be an actual shepherd of the flock? And that's something that's a whole lot more personal, a whole lot deeper. And it's a whole lot more difficult, especially if you don't really have care. Psalm 78, 52, and 53 is talking about when it says, he made his own people go forth like sheep and guided them in the wilderness like a flock, and he led them on safely so that they did not fear, but the sea overwhelmed their enemies. And so it's obvious what time period he's talking about is what? When they came out of Egypt, right, crossing over the sea. And so he's making this distinction about how he led them. And again, it's how God led them. You know, the shepherd he's got a rod and a staff, and he's got them for a reason. And he's to use them and use them effectively and use them when the time is right. But for the most part, he's leading the flock. What happens a lot of times is that you almost feel like you're trying to drive the flock, you know, like with a whip or one of those hot shot deals that you can shock them or a goad to make them move. And that may be appropriate, but really you're supposed to be out there leading. Now, a lot of times, too, what happens, and I've seen this in a lot of congregations, it's not the elders who are leading the flock, but it's the flock that are leading the elders. And that's not the way it's supposed to be either. That is the phrase I've always heard it's a horrible phrase. It's one of the worst leadership styles. It's the tail wagging the dog instead of the dog wagging the tail. And when you try to lead that way, it does not work. It's the worst leadership style you can have because everything's ruled by committee, everything's a democracy, and democracies don't work. That's why our country is not a democracy. The more it becomes like a democracy, the worse it's going to get because people cannot guide themselves by themselves. We have to have someone who leads us, and that's who God is supposed to be for us. The elders of the Old Testament were representatives of the people. They were representatives for the people. And that's the way in which God ordained things to be run. And so we have to be very careful that when you put yourself in a position of leadership, that you're actually being a leader. Place a piece of string on the table, and if you try to put your hand behind that string and push it across the table, it doesn't work. But if you put your finger out in front of it, you can guide it across really easy. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. That's what elderships are supposed to be doing as well. Okay? A lot of lessons to be learned from that. One thing I want us to do before we close, we are just a little bit past time. I appreciate all the comments. This is really good. This is something I actually did want to hear some ideas on is for this congregation, this eldership, what can this eldership do? Me, Charlie, and Craig, what can we do to make sure that we're promoting this shepherding model? What do we need to be doing? You don't have to get personal, but Charlie and Craig are not here, so we're going to talk about them. That's right. Mike?
I thought of those earlier, something that you had said, and I think that it's really important. It reminds me of it. Years ago, I interviewed a guy for a management job, and he told me, look, I'll be the manager, and I'll show you what I can do. And I think that the same with elders. You need to show what you can do before somebody even talks to you about being an elder. I
Yes.
think that, to your point in the question that you just asked, is teach the men how to be the leaders before they have to be asked.
Right.
If you're reaching in to tell somebody, hey, what do you think about being an elder? Here's what you need to go do. And then you'll be a good elder. But you got to do those things before you become.
Absolutely. It's one of the reasons why we have the deacons now that have several different of the younger guys that are shadowing them and helping out in different areas. That's a good way to get a start. If you're one of the younger guys, you're not involved in that, get involved in that. Let some of the deacons show you some of the things that they're doing. Tag along with them, some of these tasks, get you started. John? Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things is to make sure that we're providing opportunities for people. You know, we kind of hinted at it, you know, was when they were asking for the king. Said, oh, well, your sons aren't cut out for the job. Well, part of the problem is the elders probably weren't making sure things were taken care of. Right. People would take over when that leader.
Yes.
On.
Yep.
You know, and then, you know, we even hinted at it in with David, right? We looked at David. He wouldn't have, his dad wouldn't have been the one that said, hey, David, go out here and fight Goliath. You know, so it's very easy, especially in a group of 250 people, to overlook those. Especially when you have a bunch of dominant people that, hey, anything needs to get done, I'm going to be the first one to sign up on that list. The first one to jump on that email.
Yeah.
It's very easy to get lost and maybe overlooking people that are very qualified or have the ability to start learning something.
Absolutely. Yep. Ephesians 4 says congregations grow when every part does its share. We need to find that part and its share. Anthony?
I'm so impressed in yours, Brian, when we just covered 1st and 2nd Peter, as an elder, but also one that could have had some pride in being with Christ and being an apostle. Yet his instruction in 1 Peter chapter 5 is clothe yourself with humility.
Yeah.
And then also cast your anxieties on God.
Right.
Being an elder is going to come with a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this goes back to the example part too, is how do I handle that when anxiety comes to me? Because it's going to come to all the members of my flock, all the other sheep too. But I'm going to show them how I handle it.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn to God. And then that connects to Paul's instruction to the Ephesian elders when he says, build yourself up by looking at the word of grace.
Right.
So how are we going to handle the challenges, the things that need wisdom, things that need discernment? Not by how great I am,
right,
but how great God has, and how wonderful His grace has been to me to give me wisdom and guidance.
Yes, it's about trusting the truth and trusting that that's how God is going to operate is through His truth. And you put a very fine point on a lot of the things I wanted to mention with this, bring it to a conclusion. That when you think about, and I would encourage you if you want to study this more, to go back and restudy this and look at some of the other passages that mention elders in the Old Testament, lay it side by side with the qualifications of elders in the New Testament. And notice how many times the reason that those elders may have failed is because they didn't meet these qualifications that God says elders are supposed to have. Like some of them may be greedy for money, fattening themselves. They may be prone to be violent individuals. Some of these elders had no problem in saying that Naboth was blaspheming and deserving of death. And you can see that the qualifications that God puts in place are very important ones, because history has even shown that this is what makes a good elder and separates an elder from somebody who's not qualified to be an elder. And again, when you think about those examples that I had on the board a moment ago, from the sheep's perspective, being afraid as they're going through the wilderness and going to the banks of the Red Sea, of being this dark and dreary day that Mike read a few moments ago. And that's when they became scattered, because they're afraid of the storm that was there, and that the shepherd is supposed to bear them back from that very thing. You see the New Testament qualifications that would address that. So some of the things that we put together in the lesson that we shared amongst the eldership is that, you know, emphasizing the doctrine concerning the work and the place of elders constantly. That's why we're going through this 6 months of going through the qualifications. This is something that needs to always be talked about, to be very familiar with, and what the work is all about, and the doctrine that goes along with it, to thoroughly study the work, character, qualifications, and the skills that are required. Because you can go through the lists that are there in Timothy and Titus, but there's also some wisdom and some discernment that goes into how do you actually put those characteristics, those qualifications into practice. And do we look at the things in Timothy and Titus as being qualifications or disqualifications? A lot of congregations never appoint elders because they see that as a list of disqualifications. a reason to disqualify someone instead of something to aspire to and to qualify someone for that work. And that's a dangerous thing as well. We need to imitate the chief and perfect shepherd, like Anthony was talking about, what Peter talks about. It's when that chief shepherd appears. That's who we're supposed to be imitating in our examples. Examine what motivates an individual to lead. I know of one preacher especially that was telling me that the problem with the congregation that he was with was that everybody wanted to be an elder. It wasn't a matter of whether they were qualified. Everybody wanted to be an elder. So everybody was campaigning to become an elder. What can I do to become an elder? What do I need to do? Who do I need to talk to? What needs to happen so that can happen? But it wasn't about what is the actual motivation. What does the Bible say the motivation is? If anyone desires the desires the office of an elder, he desires a good work. That's the motivation. Is that what's guiding people?
If you hadn't answered the question, so you want to be an elder, what is the work you do? That may stump a lot of people.
Yeah, it goes back to what Mike was saying a minute ago. You know, that's why we've emphasized numerous times when we were looking for deacons and things like that, is that it's people that you already see doing these things. It's not necessarily that the office has to be there for them before they'll do it. They're already doing it. And so now they're being identified as the one who has the office that does that work. So examine what motivates. Educate the congregation about the nature of sheep. That's not always easy to do either. Because what are sheep?
Pretty dumb.
Doesn't write well in a sermon. Right?
It's your last.
They want to be led
Yeah.
by nature.
Yeah. And that's the thing. Because you ask somebody, do you want to be led? It's like, oh, no, I lead myself. Right? The nature of sheep. Easily scared about things. You know, naive about dangers. Right? Not able to really protect themselves often. That's something that doesn't write well in a sermon. But again, that's what sermons often are. It points out some of those things. Make sure we're always using biblical names. We typically always use the term elder, right? Shepherds is what we're looking at tonight. And that's probably one that we need to hear and use more often. Pastors, that's probably one we shy away from because of the denominational world and connotations with it. Bishops, I don't think I've ever been called a bishop before.
We'll start calling
Bishop
Eddie.
Bishop Eddie. That wouldn't write well in a sermon either. All right. And then lastly, encourage the eldership to engage in both personal and collective reevaluation of themselves. This is important because it's easy to fall into a rut. It's easy to fall victim to having external forces influencing you that you may not actually think about until you actually sit down and just be honest with yourself. Look at yourself honestly in the mirror and say, go through Ezekiel 34. Is this who I am? Or am I more like David with the sheep? Am I more like God leading the people out of captivity?
Eddie, that last point is huge. We always talk about the character qualifications that allows us to select elders.
Right.
But in this last point, if the elders are doing self-assessment, which is what you're talking about, a reevaluation, they have to go back and see, because no one is static.
Right.
You are changing all the time. And so whether it's every year or whether it's over a decade, your assessment of yourself as to the character and qualifications, you may disqualify yourself
Right.
and don't know it until you self.
Until you do that, right? Yeah. And it's not easy, because what helps is when you have people around you that love you enough to be honest with you. And sometimes the people that will be most honest with you are the people that don't like you. That's why you're supposed to value your enemies, because they will tell you the truth about yourself. And so it's tough, but you need it sometimes. Anthony?
You know, I brought it up in our little group, but one of the things that struck me about the story of David, with David and Goliath, and it really comes a little bit later, I think, in the reading. It starts talking about David's close relationship with Jonathan, and valuing those kind of relationships with godly, courageous men can help you have somebody else that can and encourage you to self-evaluate.
Right.
And maybe be bold enough to point out, here's where you're missing something. If you're close enough like that, like they had a bond that was just such a connection. They defend, but they also say, here's where you're not correct.
Right, absolutely, yeah. So those are some of the things that we've talked about. You know, if there's others that were brought up that you want to share as well, let me know. I'll be glad to keep up with those. I know we went way over tonight, but I have really appreciated all the discussion tonight. I think this is one of the most important lessons to go through as we talk about leadership among elders, is actually looking at elderships from its origin, where it comes from, what God expected, how it developed over time, and where it is, these next few lessons, where it is today and what it's supposed to be. So hopefully it's been a benefit to you as well. Nathan, would you mind leading us in prayer?
So Lord God, we love you, we praise you, we thank you so much. It's incredible the roles that you've given to in our congregation, especially our eldership, our shepherds. We pray that you and our congregation as a whole help us as sheep to listen to our shepherds, to be guided by them, to submit to them. Please help our shepherds to live up to your standard, help them to be like you were with the people of Israel, lead them out of the Exodus, out of Egypt. Help them to gather the flock together, help them to track the flock. It's a large role we put to them. We pray that you with them and you help them rise to the task, rise to the challenge that they have with our group. Blessed be your name and help our whole group to continue to grow as we follow your model and follow your example. Help our elders, especially and our shepherds, to do that to you. Blessed be your name, Christ, we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. I appreciate y'all.
I'll give you a title, Eddie. Stay around.
Like a real last one.
Well, I'm trying to